All right, Steph, this one actually pains me a little bit. I live in Baltimore. I love the Ravens, love Lamar Jackson. I actually like this guy as a player and a personality a lot. But Steph, Mark Ingram is not going to be a top 30 running back in PPR formats this
Whoa.
season. He is not in the top 30, and I know that sounds like a hot take to some, because Ingram was running back 11 in PPR last year. He had over 1,000 yards, 10 rushing touchdowns, added five more touchdowns receiving. But look, to me, that season he had in 2019 was great, but that is like his absolute ceiling. I don't think he should have come anywhere close to that last year. And I think this year there are even more signs to say he's probably not getting anywhere close. And by that I mean top 30 level of close to that in
Wow.
2020. So first things first, we'll talk about this Ravens offense. I know it's an elite offense. We're expecting a lot of things from them again in 2020. But their season last year was just absolutely historical. They had the most rushing yards in a season of any team ever. And I expect a lot from Lamar Jackson. I expect a lot from the running backs there. I think the running game is what they want to do. I think if I was a betting man, I'd bet on them to lead the NFL in rushing yards again in 2020. But to expect them to match or beat the record they set last season is not really, a reasonable expectation. I think there's a chance they're close. I think maybe they come within 5%, within 10% of that, which would be a great
They got
season.
Lamar Jackson, man.
They do, and the sky's the limit for Lamar. But I think if they come within 5-10% of the rushing yards they had last year as a team, that is going to be a remarkable year for them in 2020. So first things first, I just expect that overall rushing yardage volume to come down ever so slightly, which just is one hit to Mark Ingram in this case. So next, let's just talk about more of Mark Ingram as a player and what I expect of his role this season. And the first thing here, and this popped off the page at me, Steph. I had to fact check myself several times. What percentage of snaps do you think Mark Ingram played last year?
Well, I know he's their main pass pro running back that they have out there in passing downs, and he got the line share of the carry. So I'll say something like 65, 70%.
Just a little bit high there. Steph, I'll give it away. Mark Ingram played 48% of snaps in 2019.
Whoa.
48%, not even half. He
Dang.
played a lower snap percentage than Carlos Hyde, Royce Freeman, and the intern, Patrick Laird, which is insane. Like, I know the narrative that's saying, oh, he's going to get more snaps than that is like they blew teams out and Gus Edwards was out there, running out the clock. But if they're blowing teams out, that is a game script dream for a running back like Mark Ingram. He should have been on the field all the time, getting all sorts of volume, milking this clock out, protecting those leads. And the fact that he only played 48% of snaps in 2019 is very concerning for me because when I looked at 2020, the Ravens are definitely going to trail more in 2020. This is another incredible stat about the Ravens season. They only trailed for an average of 8 minutes and 44 seconds per game in 2019. That was number one in the NFL by over 3 minutes per game. So they played with a lead pretty much the entire game. No reason for Mark Ingram not to be on the field early and often. I think there will be times this season where they're in more passing situations. Maybe they're coming from behind. I think that's going to lead to more snaps for Justice Hill and less snaps for Mark Ingram because Justice Hill is that lead receiving back in Baltimore. And look, I don't want to knock Ingram for his age. I know that's like the popular thing to say. He's going to turn 31 this season. He is on the wrong side of 30 at the running back position, but we see it, with guys like Adrian Peterson, Frank, or some guys are superheroes and can play into their 30s at the running back position. And Ingram was great last year, so I'm not going to necessarily use that against him, but it's definitely not a case for him. And then when I look at the backfield, it's like they brought back Gus Edwards. Justice Hill is still there. And they brought in J.K. Dobbins in the second round of the draft. They spent a second round pick on one of the top running backs in the class, and it's not for him to sit on the bench. I know Ingram's contract, the Ravens have an out after the season, so maybe they're thinking forward. But they didn't draft J.K. Dobbins with that draft capital to let him ride the bench for his entire rookie season. Steph, what do you think about J.K. Dobbins? I know the popular narrative is like, oh, Mark Ingram's going to get, I don't know, like 70% of the work and J.K. Dobbins will get 30%. How do you see that shaking out?
Yeah, I think Dobbins will slowly get worked in I took some volume away from Gus Edwards, a little bit from Ingram, and then pretty much took everything away on the ground from Justice Hill. So I think Dobbins will slowly work his way in. I think he's a back half of the season if we're just talking 2020 redraft. Love him in a dynasty, especially for next year, even though I think it's actually a very high possibility that, should the Ravens go on a playoff run, Ingram's back, and he's right in that same role that he's been in. But I do really like Dobbins a lot. He's a dynasty, gold mine.
Point being, like, even if he does get slowly worked in throughout the season, it's not great for Mark Ingram that they have Gus Edwards, who they brought back as a free agent, draft J.K. Dobbins. They still have
He was
Justice
efficient
Hill.
too.
Yeah, it's just a really crowded backfield there, and I think Ingram will make the most of his touches. I think he scores 6-7 touchdowns. I think he gets 800, 900 yards. But that just concerns me in that backfield. I definitely have him with less touches in 2020. And one last thing I want to talk about with Ingram, something that inflated his finish in 2019 that people aren't really talking about, is the receiving efficiency. So Mark Ingram scored 5 receiving touchdowns on only 26 receptions in 2019. That's 1 of every 5 receptions going for a touchdown. I looked at the first 8 years of Mark Ingram's career in New Orleans, and in the first 8 years, he had 5 total receiving touchdowns, which matches what he had last season. The first 8 years, those 5 touchdowns were on 226 receptions. So instead of 1 of every 5 going for a touchdown, 1 of every 45 catches went for a touchdown. And if he stayed with that kind of like career efficiency with his touchdown percentage last season, on 26 catches, he would have had 0 or 1 receiving touchdown. So, the receiving efficiency is something Ingram historically has not been great at. I mean, he's been an adequate pass catcher, but the touchdown rate was just through the roof. And I know the popular counter argument here is like, oh, but it's the Ravens and it's Lamar Jackson, and that's why, Lamar loves dumping to the running back and their scoring opportunities and all that stuff. But look, Mark Ingram played on the Saints for the first 8 years of his career. He played with Drew Brees, Hall of Fame quarterback, who we all know loves throwing the ball to the running back position. So I'm not buying that counter argument that like the Ravens running back receiving work is suddenly more valuable than the Saints. And he's going to split those targets with Justice Hill and with J.K. Dobbins this year, just like in New Orleans. He split with Alvin Kamara back in the day, was splitting it with guys like Pierre Thomas, Darren Sproles. Like, that's not going to change. So the offense move for Ingram is like a lateral move. And just looking at what he's done efficiency-wise through the air and volume-wise through the air in his career doesn't add up to another season like that in 2020. And I actually expect that 26 reception number to come down a little bit. He's definitely not scoring 5 touchdowns. Maybe he gets 1. I think I have him statted out for 1. But that's just another chink in the armor. Like, that could be 4 or 5 less touchdowns. That doesn't even count what he's doing on the ground.
Okay, all right. Look, I get that it's a bold predictions episode, but you have Ingram in your rankings at the RB33. I've been mine at the RB20. And I think most people are on my side. We put out a poll on Twitter. We were having a heated debate earlier this week about where Mark Ingram finishes. It got 231 votes. I'll have that poll up on the screen. And 60% of the votes said Ingram is in the top 24 next year. So in terms of a consensus, most people have him, at least as an RB2. And look, I'm going to make my case for Ingram here. He's the one from a contract standpoint, veteran leadership standpoint, a production standpoint. He's been highly efficient pretty much his entire career. His 9-year career, he's at 4.6 yards per attempt. And he's consistently produced in the NFL while getting less than 14 carries a game. He's never been like a full, 16, 17, 18 carry a game workhorse. He was at 5 yards a carry last year on 202 rushing attempts. You mentioned the 5 touchdowns through the air. Yeah, I could see that coming down. But when I'm watching the Ravens on film, one thing I'm seeing is that the Ravens want Ingram out there to pass block, and when defenses don't blitz, that's a perfect time for Ingram to get into check down mode. And they're expecting Lamar to run. So you think of a pass rusher gets behind the line. Now they have to make a decision in split seconds. Do I go after Lamar, who's going to take off with the ball, who's an electric runner? Or am I going to go after Ingram, who most of the time is going to end up being wide open in the flats with an almost free trip to the end zone? So I don't necessarily see a complete drop-off of that receiving efficiency. I don't think they let J.K. Dobbins get into the game for pass protection. So, look, give me the RB1 and the best rushing offense in the league. We see teams with mobile quarterbacks usually have good running backs as well. So, look, Ingram's not a sexy name, and I don't think he's an RB1 next year. I have him in my rankings, like I said, at RB20, but Ingram is just cut from the same cloth as guys like Jarvis Landry. You mentioned Frank Gore, who are just these yearly fantasy producers that aren't sexy picks, but they're historically great over their entire careers, which are typically longer careers. So I haven't seen a real reason to expect Ingram's performance to take a massive decline. There's more evidence to me that the opposite's true. And we should certainly expect Ingram to outperform his current ADP, which is the RB27 per Fantasy Pros expert consensus rankings for 2020. Yes, he hurt his calf at the end of last year, but he's had plenty of time to have that healed and rehabbed. He's been an RB1 4 out of the last 5 seasons. So it's really hard for me to look at all of those numbers and all of the production he's had up to this point in his career and just say he's going to fall off completely. But I was pretty floored by that snap share number. We'll see. We'll see how this pans out. I don't think either of us are going to come to an agreement. This is one that's been a heated debate that I'm sure we're going to continue to have all the way up until draft day.
Yeah, Steph, I've made my case, and I think this is going to be one of those situations where we agree to disagree. And look, you can have all the Ingram you want, and that's just going to give me value on my guys, in that 5th, 6th round. So you can have them. You can have them. It's absolutely fine, but it'll be fun to watch the Ravens this year for sure.